Welcome to the Romancing Like Swift podcast, where we talk craft and the business of being an author while fangirling over Taylor Swift. We're your hosts, Morgana Bevan
and Emily Jane. On this podcast, we'll discuss what authors can learn from Taylor Swift. There are many amazing Taylor Swift podcasts in existence. We know this, but our focus is on mining Taylor Swift's lyrics and business practices for tips to help our fellow authors excel in their careers. It has been a few weeks since Morgana and I have recorded together, and we've had plenty of time to process Tortured Poets Department. Of course, for the listeners, it's been a really long time since Tortured Poets Department came out, so y'all have definitely processed it. But today we're going to be talking about lessons that we have learned from Tortured Poets Department anthology. So do we want to start with who we are, just a quick reminder of who we are, and then dive into what these lessons are?
Yes, let's do that. I'm Morgana Bevan. I'm a celebrity romance author from Wales, but I'm currently traveling full time, which is why my audio changes every week, because right now I'm in a very tiled room in Phuket in Thailand, and controlling the sound is a nightmare. So apologies for that. I am a folklore era Swiftie, and Tortured Poets Department pretty much destroyed me for like 5 days straight.
I am Emily Jane, and I write contemporary rom-coms. I live out in the wilderness, it feels like, so my sound quality is always interrupted by things like roosters and dogs and whatnot. I am a 1989 era Swiftie, and yeah, I have been all over the map on Tortured Poets Department. It's definitely an emotional roller coaster, right?
Yes. And it's funny how it takes like a couple of listens. Every time you listen to the full album through, something new hits you.
Yes, absolutely.
And I love that.
Yeah. So today, in terms of lessons, I'm going to try and break down the big lessons I got from it, and then Morgana is going to jump in. And as always, we're here as professional writers, not as fans. I mean, we are fans, obviously, but we're looking at it from a marketing and a craft and a creative standpoint. And a little bit more about myself. Morgana has, as far as I know, you've only ever been indie pubbed, right? Because you jumped into the industry.
Yeah, only interested in being an indie pub.
Yeah. And when I first started writing, there was only trad pub. So I was trad pubbed for the better part of my career and then have only moved to indie in the last 5 years. And I'm very interested at this album from that point of view, from the point of view of the freedom that Taylor Swift has at this point in her career as an established creator, as a master of her craft, as someone who has a huge fan base. And the freedom that she has in this album is unprecedented, I think. She has gotten some critical criticism for how long the album is, the anthology, all 31 songs, the breadth of material she covers, how far back she's gone in her sort of emotional experience with different people. She's gotten some criticism for that.
But then some of that criticism was revoked afterwards.
That's true, yeah.
I don't remember which publication it was, but they admitted they judged it immediately when, as we know, this album needed weeks to sit.
It does. With. Yeah. There's so much to unpack there. And I think that if we look at this album compared to her sort of pre-folklore albums, I'm going to say, like, I'm going to mentally mark the pandemic.
Folklore was the divide.
Yes. Yeah. That's where she first started really going deep on creating the kinds of albums that she really wanted to. And I think that's something that a lot of us did during the pandemic. It was this moment when it was like, okay, the world is changing. I'm going to stop thinking about what other people demand of me and focus more on what I demand of myself. And I think that's definitely true for Folklore versus her earlier albums from my point of view. Obviously, she and I don't chat much. I don't know what was going on in her head at the time, but that's just the impression that I've gotten. So if you're listening, you might be like, okay, so what does any of this have to do with writing? So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about the differences as an author of being trad published versus indie pub. And when you are trad published, there are so many gatekeepers. There are so many people who are trying to edit is the wrong word to use, but it's the word that comes to mind. So let me make this difference. I guess what I really mean is censor. And I don't mean in the censorship. Morgana, help me out here in terms of terminology.
I've never been through this. I worked in a traditional publishing house in Edinburgh. I was an intern. So I've seen a bit of it. And it always, in my impression, the final book always depended on the opinions of the editor that was working with you. The relationship was different to like me and my editor, where in a sense, my editor, Dana, is incredible and I trust her with anything story related and I rely on her. But most authors don't have that relationship with their editors. They come in and they fix line copy or they fix grammar and they're not really there to do story. Whereas the impression I get with trad is you could write the book and then the book gets completely changed depending on what that editor wants.
Yes. I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that indie pub books are not edited because they are. And like, if you have a good content editor, the story can be edited, the line editing, the grammar, all of that stuff happens in indie pubbing and should happen in indie pubbing. The kind of editing that I mean when I'm talking about as it's that the product itself is molded into something different than I know I sound critical when I'm talking about this, and I absolutely don't mean to be critical of trad pubbing for this. It is important that they hit a market in a certain way because they have financial obligations, they have rent in New York, all of these reasons
Yeah,
why.
you should be critical because we've got the Simon and Schuster trial where they admitted that they're throwing spaghetti at the walls. They don't know what's going to hit. They have
Yeah,
no clue. So it is very much down to the personal preferences of the editor assigned to that book.
yeah. They go into it knowing what has hit before. And
Yes.
so they are very likely to try and sculpt what you produce into something that is similar to what has hit before and that what they think will be a surefire sell through. It's frustrating. It's hard. I, of course, have been trained by however many years in this profession to like justify their standpoint. I'm realizing as we're having this conversation that I probably sound a little bit like I have Stockholm syndrome with trad pub, which is something I'm working on, something I'm aware of, something to talk about with my therapist. But my point is, regardless of whether or not their attitudes are justified, there is a lot of this gatekeeping slash editing slash censorship that happens in trad pub. And as indie pub authors, we don't have to deal with that as much. Just quite simply, when we are taking on all of the financial risk, we can put our time and energy behind a book we really are passionate about in a way that trad publishers just won't. It depends on your editor, it depends on the market in the moment, all of these other things. They have so many reasons to shut down your ideas. And for example, personally, is that my book Heart Smart, that was released by Smarty Pants Romance and has done quite well for me. I originally had the concept of that story probably 15 years earlier, and I kept trying to sell it to different editors at Harlequin. And every time I told them about my idea for a physically and emotionally wounded professor who needs a professional makeover, the response was always, "Can't you make him a billionaire?"
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, "No, I can't make him a billionaire because there are no billionaire professors. I'm sorry, they just don't exist."
Yeah.
I mean, that's a for example. But to bring this back to Taylor Swift, if you look at her musical career, there was a time in her career where she was more traditionally published, i.e., she was with record labels. She had less freedom to do what she wanted to do early in her career when she was writing country, and then all the way up through Reputation. There were more voices in the room.
Yes. I think we just look at the amount of vault tracks coming out with re recordings, and that tells
Yes.
you how much got left on the cutting room floor, not because she wanted it to be cut left, but because the industry, whether it was just the label or the producers at the time, or whether it was the industry standards of an album has to be this length, songs have to be this length. You have to have an album full of singles and hits, otherwise you're not going to chart. So things changed after Folklore, I think. And
Absolutely.
Folklore was the first time she saw that she could have some kind of success by not sticking to the mold.
Yes. It was definitely a time when she was breaking all the rules, right? And it was hugely transformative for her and for her fans because Folklore was definitely an album that we didn't know we needed. I, even as a longtime fan of singer songwriter music, I never would have said, that's what I want Taylor to do next.
It was what introduced me to her. Folklore dropped and I didn't listen when it dropped. It took the recordings for the Pond Studio recordings to come out on Disney Plus, and then I listened. I think it was with Exile. YouTube just served me Bon Iver singing Exile, and I was in. That was the end of me. I went and found it there and then, and I watched the entire show on Disney Plus. It was her explaining pieces of what went into every track that turned my writer brain onto Taylor Swift. Something clicked with my muse and Taylor Swift from that. And I didn't have that before.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And I feel like we're getting more and more of that from her, more of an insight into what's going on behind the scenes. And it's fascinating and it's compelling, and we keep showing up for it. With Tortured Poets Department, there's so much there. And I think the fact that she calls it an anthology rather than an album says a lot, because in books, an anthology is not necessarily something you are supposed to read from cover to
In
cover.
order. Yeah.
Yeah. Order is less important. And we see that, I feel like, in Tortured Poets Department. Tortured Poets Department is less of an album and more of a buffet. At any moment, you can walk down the line of the album and pick a song or two, and they are a little more mix and match, I think, than I feel like a lot of her other albums, order was important. And in this one, order is relevant, but less crucial.
The only place she's maintained it is the track fives.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they are emotionally devastating. Yeah, you're right. It's one of those things if you kind of wake up and decide, what emotion do you want to be feeling today? Because album's going to feed you it all.
Yeah.
And you can pick, yeah. I'm still not at the point of being able to skip a lot. I tried to put it on shuffle and I lasted like a day of shuffling.
Well, I've had this odd experience with the album of at some point I fell in love with the song The Albatross. And so I keep going back to that song and starting there and then getting only the second half of the
I do that with the manuscript. I start with the manuscript sometimes. And then Apple just keeps playing it on a loop and it's great.
Yeah. I think the lesson is trying to figure out what your reader wants and what you can give them that meshes with what you want to be writing. How do you bridge that distance between what readers want and what you think they want and what you want to be writing in the moment?
Yeah. We always say write to market. And this is one of those areas where sometimes it's contradictory to say write what you want, but write to market. And really what it is it's see what's in the market that speaks to you and the brand you're setting yourself so that you can feed the readers what they want, but while feeding yourself. Whether it's like just specific tropes or something, but yeah, it's a hard balance to strike.
It is.
And I've done it to myself with Rockstar. Like I went so hard on Rockstar, I burnt out. And it's the major part of my brand. It's what readers want from me. I want to write other stuff. And it's like, well, now I'm taking steps to highlight the pieces of what I've fed into the rock stars that actually cross over into other stuff I write so that they branch out.
Yes. Yeah. It's a question of finding what is yummy about your rock star books that your readers are loving, and then making sure they realize that that yumminess is in your other stories as well.
Exactly.
And then it's also a balance of financially, like how many rock star books do you have to write to justify what's the balance of rock stars and other things?
Yeah. That's what I'm dealing with for my plans for next year. Yep. It's not a fun game.
Yeah, these are all freedoms that indie writers have that trad writers don't have and trad publishers don't have.
I've changed my plans for my publishing for 2025 like 6 times since the year started. It keeps changing. And trad is like fixed in stone, what, 2 years in advance?
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. That's exciting. It's fun. It's the more freedom we have, and it definitely fuels the creativity in a way that trad doesn't. But at the same time, again, looking at the lessons from Taylor, you've got to make sure that you are balancing out.
Yeah, I think a lot of tortured poets comes down to the argument of writing the book of your heart or following the market. Just because this album, as much as we say she's giving the fans what they want, the fans didn't want this album. Half of the fans adore this album now, but we didn't expect it. I think with the trajectory of Midnights, we were expecting something different. I haven't got a clue what that different was. I'm just glad. I love Tortured Poets Department. I think the fans were expecting something different, and this album is for Taylor. As we all say, it's been said a lot online. It's the slate being wiped clean.
Yes.
She's
Yeah.
dealt with the emotional trauma of a 10-year situationship and all the pieces that fell apart around the same time, going through the Eras tour, and part of it runs into meeting Travis. And she's like, the manuscript is the line. This is the fresh start. Everything after the manuscript is left behind her. She's not looking back. So very much it's an album she had to write for herself. And I think a lot
Yes.
of us, we have that in our first books. The first book we ever write is the book that won't leave us alone. Mine was.
Right.
But it's also, they tend to be the hardest books to market because you don't go into them. There was this argument on threads. Some readers are getting annoyed that we all focus on the tropes and we focus on the marketing language. Like, if you like this book, you'll like this book. If you like this author, you'll like this book. Some readers are getting annoyed by it, but it's a marketing mechanism and a marketing language that helps us sell books. Some authors don't go into a book planning the tropes. I go in with a list of tropes I want to hit, because if I don't go in with a list of tropes, I do not hit any tropes. And this is what happened with my very first book. Literally after this call, I'm doing a ads meeting to start running ads to this first book. And I'm like, I need tropey content, and I can't figure out tropey content for this book. There's a danger line for us as authors. So Taylor could do this because of the position she's in and how far she's come.
Right.
And I think we should all take lessons from her in that method then. She's built her career on pre-folklore. It's to industry standard. She's built her career. It was marketable. It fit the radio hits and it got her recognized. Now she can do whatever the hell she wants. And I think there are a lot of established authors that can now do whatever the hell they want to do within reason. I mean, they still hit those marketing points, but there might be 1 or 2 books a year where they don't fit the marketing grind that we set to things. They just write wherever they want. And then if it fits the market, it fits the market. I think we have to take stepping stones to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My lesson is it very much is a point of establish the career, then do whatever you want.
Yes. And I'm going to point out that while establishing a career and a fan base and all of those things, you are also building the skill set that allows you to have more freedom. Tortured Poets Department is a masterful album. She throws so much out there craft wise. It is very dense. There's all of these literary allusions. There's all of this subtext. There's all these themes that are woven through the whole album about prophecy and Cassandra. And there's all these things. She could not have created that album 10 years ago. Not only would there not have been an audience for the album, let's say 15 years ago, but she couldn't have crafted that album then. She is a more masterful craftsman than she was 15 years ago, just like you are a more masterful writer than you were at the beginning of your career. So there is something a little bit tragic, I think, about the writer life and that first story that pulls you, that hits so much
It's never going to be as good as what you write today. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I often think about Jane Austen and how in another time authors went back and they revisited books over time. I mean, like Pride and Prejudice was her first book, but the edition that we read now was not necessarily the initial one that was out there. I think that she re-edited it at different times. And that's one of the reasons why, I mean, the fact that it's her first book is one of the reasons why we love it so much, because it speaks to like her core story, but it is also just so well put together in a way that I'm sure she went back to it and looked at it and took things out and added things in and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, as it went through. Publications, absolutely. Which is a thing that some authors do. It's something I'm intending to do with that first book. It's not going to
Yeah.
have major changes, but there are some changes I want to make before I translate it. And a lot of authors do go back and rewrite their initial books so that they fit the brand, or they just unpublish them,
Yeah.
which is a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that like I have early books that I got my rights back to, and I fully intended to put them up. And then I was like, no, I love this less than I thought I did. It's going to take some rewrites. And sometimes I've done rewrites, and other times I have not.
Yeah. And they're just sitting there waiting. Yeah. I don't know if this is totally a lesson, but with the anthology, the whole thing, Torture Poe Department's the anthology, we now have this question of online, we're questioning a lot whether anything she's ever told us is fictional, is actually fictional. And it's just occurred to me that it could be both. It could be fictional and non-fictional. There could be a piece in every one of these songs that she's told us that are fictional that we are now listening to Tortured Poets and going, actually, this reminds me of her life, and it reminds me of something that happened in folklore that's supposedly totally fictional. And it could be a case of like there's pieces of her in these songs. And if we take the time period of when she wrote folklore and the things she might have been going through, it essentially gave her these fictional stories that she created, gave her the coping mechanisms to figure out how she felt or to imagine how the trajectory her journey would go if she followed the path of these other characters. So like when we get Peter with, I'm convinced that Peter is connected to Cardigan, Betty, and James. I think Peter is the future of James.
Yes. Yeah.
When you take that as a story group, that means that stuff happened with Cardigan, that group of the trilogy. There was a point in the Pond studio recordings where she said Betty and James got back together in the future. Peter says they do not. Between folklore being written and released and Pond Studios being released, and now writing Peter, something changed in her mindset. So it's like each book we write, we put a piece of ourselves in it. And it helps us deal with something in our lives that we've had to deal with. But it helps, like generally it helps. It helps us clear the emotions or see something played out in the way. You know, we get this idea of Disney. We want to see Disney princesses of all races and all sizes so that we can relate to somebody on screen as children or even now. I think it's like that. It's like you need to see it played out in a book with a piece of you to see it come to fruition and it all work out for you to feel like you've dealt with that. And that's part of what I think she's doing with some of the songs. So they're fictional, but they're not fictional.
Right. We've talked before in an earlier episode about how she is clearly deeply empathetic and she can take on that emotional experience of a lot of different characters. The way you do that as a writer and as I think a songwriter is by imagining yourself as that character. It's a way of playing out different options of your life, different possible futures, things like that. I think she does that really, really well. It's almost like method acting, except it's like method songwriting or method book writing. And I certainly do that with all my characters. And I'm assuming you do also, that when you're writing a character, not just a main character, you have to sort of get into their head and figure out what it is they want and where they're going and what's driving them. There's a way in which all of the characters in a book are some version of me. And I think that all of the characters in her songs are some version of her. And we're definitely seeing that story unfold. And I think the more that she is authentically herself, the more of herself she puts into those stories, the more they resonate with listeners.
Yeah. And I think a major thing with this album is it will connect with different people at different points in their lives. And I said this when we attempted to do a react thing and it was going to be too long, but there are people that when it released and probably still now that do not get Tortured Poet Department. They don't like it. And you could be a major Swiftie and hate it. But I say the reason for that is that you haven't been in the situations that caused the extreme emotions that this album is invoking. And I think you're extremely lucky for not being able to relate to it. Because I wouldn't wish for anyone to have to deal with a situationship of a man dropping in, or woman dropping into your inbox every couple of months, just to make sure you're still hanging on the line, because that has happened to too many people.
For a decade.
Yeah.
That is a long time to be living your life in what ifs.
Yeah. But the frightening thing is that if I wasn't a stronger person, I would be in that situation.
Yeah.
So if you don't relate, it is okay. It's a good thing. And there will be other albums. And hopefully the day never comes where this album starts to resonate.
Yeah. Well, I do think that it's an emotionally mature album.
Yes. There's a retrospective feel to it.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. I feel like we get closure on some things in her life, or she gets closure on some things in her life. We see that happening sort of in real time with songs like Thank You, Amy and the manuscript.
Yeah. It's So Long London. Like that
Yeah.
song was devastating, but at the same time, needed. But then have you watched any of the live streams of the Paris shows?
Just a little bit. I'm having to look it up. The really good one.
She did Down Bad. She did Who's Afraid of Little Old Me.
That one, yes. Who's Afraid of Little Old Me? That was like spectacularly unhinged and deliciously
Yeah.
angry.
Mine is she did Smallest Man Who Ever Lived,
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
but with a drum beat from a band. An army marching into war
Oh,
kind of drum beat. Some people are saying it was a marching band, but it's not. It's an army marching into war. So she's singing this song to this drum beat, and then I'm seeing like reels that compare some of the things that Matt Healy has done against what she's doing on stage and the performance, like the movements, the choreography and stuff. It's very much just a dig at him.
yes.
And I'm sorry, I'm petty and I live for this stuff.
Right? Oh, yeah. I've also seen the choreography for I Can Do It With a Broken Heart, which was just spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had this moment of just pure awe for her work ethic, because I feel like if I was in her shoes and dating Travis Kelce, I would not want to like be reworking my show. I would want to just be hanging out with him at the beach.
So apparently they started reworking the show. So we're recording this May 15th, and Taylor said on night 3 or 4 of Paris that they started working on this 9 months ago.
Wow.
When the tour broke for the 2 months, they did not take a break. They went straight back into rehearsals to rehearse the new take, which is part of the reason. The theory is that the reason So High School is so short on the set is because it wasn't written when they started rehearsing and it's been added in at the last minute. But yeah, she's been holding this album over our heads for much longer than we thought.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, if it was me, I would want to just hang out with my boyfriend. I wouldn't want to be doing all that work, but
Yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah.
So like more lessons. We're probably going to do individual episodes on a lot of these things because we have so many feelings and like our opinions keep changing. So one for me that we were trying to figure out how to do a full episode on is Easter eggs.
Yes.
So like I'm saying about relating Peter back to Cardigan and Betty in August. Listeners went from listening to Peter and then immediately went and listened to that trilogy. And then there's other songs that make you think of other songs, and then they've immediately gone back and listened to those ones. Was it Hits Different? There was something about Hits Different that connected to Fortnite, because there's a line in Fortnite about how they were supposed to come and get her, but they didn't come and get her, whatever. I can't remember the full
Right.
line. And at the end of Hits Different, there's the key turns in the door. Is it you? She's waiting for somebody at the end of Hits Different. And it's like those two songs then marry into each other. Like Hits Different is where she ended up. And the other thing I love about her, like we were saying about the literary references and everything, she's educating a generation.
Yes. Like unapologetically, right? She's no longer feeling like she has to justify her intelligence. She's just like, I'm going to put it out there. If you get it, great. If you need to research it, you go do that on your own time. But here's the song, full of literary references, full of all kinds of stuff. Keep up.
Yeah, exactly. That was my reaction, like going through the Reddits and people going, "Who's Cassandra?" I'm like, who the hell do you think Cassandra is? She's Greek. How do you not know this? But to me,
Yes.
it's absurd that people don't know this, but that's the education system now.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was fresh out of college, there was this trend of like cultural education, like what every first grader should learn, there's a whole series of books about that. And I feel like Tortured Poets Department is that for the modern listener.
She knows what Swifties are like, so she drops any mention of anything. She knows they're going down a rabbit hole. So she knew going in that everybody was going to go straight back to every other song she's ever written, searching for Easter eggs, and they found them. She's introduced us, even with, you think about folklore with Great American Dynasty. None of us knew who Rebecca Harkness was before Great American Dynasty. I didn't know who Clara Bow was until Clara Bow.
Yeah.
It's like she's introducing people to strong women that have been, I don't know, trailblazers really in
Yeah,
their
yeah.
fields, and then have been vilified and disregarded, basically. I think that's why I love the song Clara Bow, because of the way it faces that trajectory and like gives the impression that she knows she's in this position now. She's at the top of the pinnacle, but the fall is coming.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
so many angles to that song, and I think that's the thing with her, is she's embraced the poetry.
Yes. Yeah.
Like she's not afraid for a song to take multiple meanings, and it is a case of, well, every line could mean something completely different, and then we get another piece of context from somewhere else and it means something totally different again. The meaning changes depending on your background knowledge. It is literally like it's an English degree in an album.
Yeah. It is, absolutely. That's one of the things I was about to say was like you could totally teach a whole school's year worth of English by just dissecting the album and like putting together, pulling threads from different things. But I also think the depth there is when we've talked about this before in terms of her brilliance, she's created such a big sandbox for us to play in that it calls us back over and over again. We want to go back. We want to listen again. We want to pick something apart. We want to, oh, wait, I want to go back and I want to listen to this other song on this other album. It's this way of like sucking us into her world and her music and keeping us there.
Yeah, which I think there's two pieces to that. So first, the Easter egg thing, where she's dragging people back. Authors can do that, as we all do anyway. In the romance genre, we're sticking cameos in. I'm feeding potential characters 5 books before I ever come to write their book. I fed in characters in my first ever book that I have readers, I've seen reviews where readers going, I hope we get Isla's story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's always been on my bucket, like it's on my publishing card, but I've never got to it yet, and I intend to. But it's like what I want is for them to pick up, there's a side character that could get a story, and then start rooting for them. And you see in Megan Quinn's group, they're going crazy demanding books for certain characters, and that's the kind of
Yes.
thing you want.
Absolutely.
So then you have this concept of us creating universes.
Right.
And this is a thing that Joe Solari has me working on, trying to figure out how I create the Morgana verse and how I make sure that all readers understand that every book I write exists in this universe and every character I write exists in that same time period, and they can cross over any time, and there's hints all through so that readers bounce around and don't just stick to the, oh, I read rock star or I read actors. They intermingle. And I think this is an area a lot of authors are moving into, but it's all still new and we don't know what it looks like.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what she's kind of done, is she's built this universe where we're all now going, wait, does this thing happen in the same place? We always said that Tolerate It and Bedazzled. It felt like Bedazzled was the epilogue to Tolerate It.
Yes.
That kind of thing whereby it's never ending.
Is it So Long London where she makes the quip about him making fun of her with an esoteric joke?
Yes. No, is it?
It might be Black Dog.
It was Black Dog.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, hello, Mr. Tolerate It.
Yeah.
She's done having him tolerate her.
That's the other thing with the literary combinations. I always looked to Tolerate It and I heard Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier's book. Always. That is Rebecca to me. At which point, I think we know she's a big reader and we all take some kind of emotional connection at the time from a character. And I didn't like Rebecca. It took me a lot to finish that book.
Right. Because she's
a doormat.
Isn't she the character who doesn't even have a name? Because Rebecca is the first wife, right? Yeah. So the point of view character does not even have a name. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a doormat, and she's still a doormat by the end of it. Like, it's a very confusing and painful book to read depending on your emotional position and what your life experiences have been. And for Taylor to have written Tolerate It and it to resonate so much with Rebecca and that character, it makes you think that there were points in time where Taylor felt like the nameless character in Rebecca.
Which is heartbreaking to me because, I mean, my God, if she feels that way sometimes, there's no hope for the rest of us, right?
Yeah. It's that piece of, we all take inspiration from different places and things changed. I don't think she relates to that nameless character now.
Right.
Literature, romance novels, we've said it before, it gives you a viewpoint to learn something. Whether it's just the fact that, like, if you're plus sized and you just need to read some curvy romance heroines getting the hot guy, it gives you a confidence boost.
Right.
And that's what we try to do through romance. We try to intentionally and unintentionally guide people into feeling better about themselves. We want them to pick up a romance book in whatever mood they're in and finish it feeling like their heart is full.
Right. Feeling empowered, feeling valued, feeling like they have a place in the world.
Exactly. And I think that's what she does with a lot of her songs. When we take it as every song can be interpreted differently, every song has a different emotional resonance, and you will read it differently depending on where you are in your life and what your experience has been at that time. There were certain songs on the first half that weirdly, like, I think I put a comment on Facebook. I was discussing it on release day with people. The anthology dropped, and I was like, it just broke me. The Black Dog, I think, broke me. And it was the first one. And other people going, no, like track 3 broke me. And they'd been crying through the whole first half. And it took me to the Black Dog to have that emotional resonance to go, oh my God, what is this? And now as I've listened through a lot more of the earlier songs whack me every time. But then I get used to it. And then another one cuts me off at the knees unexpectedly. How you react to something changes over time.
Right. Which is very true with books as well. A great book, you can come back to it over and over again and get something slightly different each time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm rereading Manacled right now. And
oh.
Yeah. I'll have to message you some of my like realizations as I'm rereading.
I've never read it, so I don't know.
Okay. Sorry.
Isn't that the one that's like Harry Potter fan fiction slightly?
Yes.
I'm not a massive Potterhead either. So I've seen all the films, but I'd only read like the first 4 books because my father would read them to me before bed. And then I got too old and that was the end of that. But so I've never finished reading them. So I feel like I'd miss a piece there. But yeah, I don't know if we've gone through all our lessons because I don't have notes for this.
I think we've gone through a lot, and I think we're going to hit other things later.
Yeah, because I
We'll be
just feel like
unpacking this for a long time.
exactly, that's the problem. I have a realization and then I forget to write a note down. Or I send you a message and I haven't gone back through our gigantic thread of me having realizations at stupid o'clock in the morning. There's a lot of pieces, even in this episode, that we want to do full episodes on. Like, I want to look at her launching, I want to look at her collaborations. There's so many pieces that we could dig into, and we will be.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. Yes. Well, and you think about the term I was using at the beginning of the episode about editing and saying that, like, yes, we definitely have to edit our books. And I've been calling her album unedited. And yet there is a lot of restraint in some of those songs. And like the fact that she's known for collaborating with other musicians, and yet there are only two collaboration songs on this album.
which is surprising.
Yeah, it shows a lot of restraint because she picked the ones she wanted to actually collaborate on. Like it shows this editing that she did. So it's not someone else editing her, it's her choosing to edit herself.
Yeah, because she could have done a lot more collabs just to
Yes.
like, there's this promotion element to the collaborations.
Yeah.
So the fact she didn't do a load of collabs said that it very much this was the album she had to write, and she probably didn't care how it landed.
Yeah, I think
Never
so.
mind the fact it broke all the records and it's her best release ever. But
Yeah.
yeah, we are going to do something slightly different for a couple of weeks. Emily had this idea to do Kiss, Marry, Kill because of So High School. Was it in So High School she did it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to do Kiss, Marry, Kill on Tortured Poet Department songs.
Yes. So each of us are going to list off one song that we would kiss, one song we would marry, and one song that we would kill, with the caveat of we know all the songs are fantastic. So in any given week, if we're going to kill a song, that doesn't mean we don't like the song. It just means it's not hitting for us at that moment.
Yeah.
So who wants to go
really
first?
Hard.
It is really hard.
Do we do Kill last? Should we do it in order? Or do we end on a high and do the marry last?
Marry last. Yeah, let's do that. So let's do Kiss, Kill, Marry.
Okay, yeah.
Or Kill, Kiss, Marry.
Let's do Kiss, Kill, Marry. Okay, this is going to be really hard.
You want to go first? Or?
Okay, so Kiss. I'm like scrolling through the list and going, Florida. I would kiss Florida, yeah.
Okay.
That song just like gets me every single time. I just love it.
Yeah, and I know that like, because that's the first one you messaged me in the middle of the night. And you were like, oh my gosh, Florida.
Yeah, and then 2 tracks later.
Yeah. I am going to kiss So High School.
Oh.
I just think it's so fun and delightful and
so risque without being out there. There are so many elements to that. I'm like, whoa, okay, I missed that.
Mm-hmm. It's so flirtatious and yeah.
I say I missed that, but there's the point where she's holding her breath that I was like, I know what's happening here. There was just a lot more detail that I missed. Okay, Kill. Mine is Robin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Probably my only skip song now. It's a really good song, but I'm a single woman with no interest in having children.
Right.
So it just doesn't resonate for me.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Yeah. For me, my kill is Florida. Again, I think this speaks to everybody brings their own baggage to songs and books, right? And every time I listen to it, I'm just like, ugh. And I know it has nothing to do with the song itself. It's the reference to Destin, actually, because
you messaged me something about that. I was like, this is weird. Okay.
When my kids were young, before summer break, when the kids were in elementary school, there was always these conversations about like, oh, what are your summer plans? Where are you vacationing? And I would be like, oh, we're going to go to the beach because we go to the beach every summer. We go to the beach here in Texas, which is, for the record, an admittedly shitty beach. It's not beautiful, but I love it. It's my beach. But the moms, like those sort of mean girl moms, would always be like, oh, are you going to Destin? Because it's like the beach that everyone goes to in our neighborhood for some reason. And I'm like, ew, no. And I've heard moms say like, "Oh, it's just so great there because it's like we're just in Westlake again. Like all the other moms are there." And I'm like, "Ew, I would not want to go on vacation with all the other
Yeah,
moms from my
no.
kids' elementary school." Even though my personal reaction to the song is very different from the vibe of the song, it
Yeah.
just rubs me the wrong way. Every time I'm like, "Ugh,
Every time you
that
hear that
again."
word.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
hilarious. Perfect example of how different songs resonate with different people different ways.
Yes. Yep.
My marry song, and this is really hard because I have a load. I'm gonna choose
Oh,
the
me
prophecy
too.
this time. I'm choosing the prophecy
Oh,
this time because that song just there's so many elements of my life that I feel like fit into that song, and I feel like I have been in that position of she's begging. Like I feel like I've been in that position so much that it's hard not to go, this is just perfection.
yeah. God, it's a good song. It really is.
Mhm.
So my Mary song is going to be The Albatross, which I've sort of slowly fallen in love with the more I listen to it. It's so it's just beautiful, and the image of her spreading her wings and swooping down to save him is just so gorgeous.
I think your interpretation of the albatross is different to mine
Oh,
because the albatross is a literary reference in the version that suggested she's the curse. He kills the
right.
albatross and then the ship gets cursed.
Yes, yes, but in the song, it's like she's the albatross, everyone's warned him
Uh
about
huh.
her, but then in the end, they come for him. And she, as the albatross, spreads her wings and swoops down and saves him
Okay.
from them.
Right.
Yeah, like our
The ones that
interpretation
vilify
is,
him for
yeah,
killing the
yeah,
albatross. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. You should go back and re-listen to it and see what you think.
Yeah,
See if you
clearly.
see
Yeah.
what I got out of it. Because yeah, on the first listen, it is this like, yeah, he kills the albatross and he's cursed.
But there's an end to it that I've
There's a
missed.
yeah,
Ah,
yeah,
okay. Yeah,
yeah.
we'll do that.
And I think it's just beautiful.
Right, before we wrap up, I just needed to give a special mention to this. This is episode 13.
Oh, I didn't
So,
realize.
yeah, so this is Taylor's favorite number. So if Taylor happens to see this, hi.
Well, that was well timed, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It's only because I was listing out, we did a bunch of interviews and it's like, how are we going to release this in order? And then it's episode 13. So
Nice.
serendipitous for it to be an episode discussing the Tortured Poets Department, I think, for a first new album. But yes, it's very late in Thailand. So I think we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, it's very late there, very early here, and not very early, but I have a lot of writing to do.
Oh,
Deadline, deadline.
yeah, joy.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to us ramble through our feelings on the Tortured Poets Department that keep changing.
Yes. And hopefully you learned a couple of things about writing the book of your heart and when is the right time to do that. And maybe even revisiting old books and looking at them from a new light, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for
Okay.
listening. Catch you next week.